She mocked the human for having no pedigree, until she gave birth to magnificent offspring. The grand halls of the Assyrian embassy gleamed with their characteristic silver sheen, every surface reflecting the soft blue light of the artificial atmosphere. Lady Elowen Brightstar, her fiery red hair cascading down her back like liquid copper, stood at attention before the High Council's chamber doors, her amber eyes sharp and predatory narrowed as she caught sight of her new partner approaching from the opposite corridor. "You must be joking," she muttered under her breath, watching the human male stride toward her with that irritatingly confident gait. He wore standard-issue combat armor, nothing like the elegant ceremonial garments of the Assyrian elite guard. His dark hair was cut military short, and his face bore the kind of rugged features that spoke of countless battles. "Commander Terence Snow." He introduced himself with a slight nod, not bothering with the traditional Esteran bow. "Looks like we'll be working together on this one." Elon's lips curled into a dismissive smirk. "How quaint. The council must truly be desperate to pair me with a human mercenary." "Actually," Terence replied, his green eyes twinkling with amusement, "I'm Alliance Special Operations. But hey, mercenary works too, less paperwork." Before Elon could deliver another cutting remark, the chamber doors slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the High Council members sat in their elevated seats, their faces grave beneath their ornate headdresses. "Lady Brightstar." Commander Snow, High Counselor Theron addressed them, his voice resonating through the chamber. "The situation on Nexus Prime has become critical. The artifact must be recovered before it falls into the wrong hands." Elowen stepped forward, her ceremonial armor catching the light. "My lord, sure there are more suitable partners available for this mission. Someone of proper breeding and training." Terran didn't even flinch at the insult. Instead, he just leaned against the wall, arms crossed, looking almost amused. "The human commander combat record speaks for itself." Counselor Theron replied firmly, "This mission requires both your talents, Lady Brightstar. Your knowledge of ancient Assyrian artifacts is unparalleled. Command Snow's unconventional approach to problem-solving will be essential." "Unconventional?" Elowen scoffed. "Is that what we're calling it now? I prefer effective," Terence interjected, pushing off from the wall. "But hey, if you want to stay here and debate semantics while someone else steals your precious artifact, be my guest." The council chamber fell silent. Elowen's amber eyes blazed with indignation, but she couldn't argue with his logic. The artifact's recovery was paramount. Now, she conceded through gritted teeth. "But let's get one thing straight, human. This is my mission. You're here as support, nothing more." Terence gave her a mock salute. "Whatever you say, Your Highness. Just try to keep up." The mission briefing continued, but Alan barely heard it. She was too busy seething at the human's audacity. How dared he speak to her like that? She was a daughter of House Brightstar, one of the oldest and most respected bloodlines in the Aster Empire. As they left the chamber, Terence fell into step beside her. "You know," he said conversationally, "for someone so concerned with breeding, you might want to consider that pure bloodlines tend to get real fragile after a few thousand years." Owen stopped dead in her tracks, turning to face him with barely contained fury. "Listen carefully, human. Nothing could ever happen between our kinds. You have no lineage, no true blood. You're nothing but a genetic accident." Terence's smile never wavered. "Maybe, but I'm resilient. And something tells me you're going to need that more than a fancy pedigree. Where we're headed with that." He walked away, leaving Elowen standing in the corridor, her fists clenched at her sides. She watched his retreating form, trying to ignore the way his words had gotten under her skin. She had no way of knowing then how prophetic those words would prove to be. The Alliance station stellar horizon loomed before their ship like a massive metal flower blooming in space, its petal-like docking arms extending outward to welcome vessels from across the galaxy. Elowen stood at the observation deck, her amber eyes widening despite herself at the sheer scale of human engineering. Impressed. Terrence's voice came from behind her. "Not bad for a species with no lineage, right?" She turned to find him standing closer than expected, his presence oddly magnetic. "It's adequate," she managed, trying to maintain her air of superiority despite the quickening of her pulse. "Just adequate," he chuckled, stepping even closer. "Then you haven't seen anything yet. We've got a 12-hour layover while they recalibrate our jump "Drive, let me show you around." "I hardly think that's necessary," she began, but he was already heading toward the exit. "Coming, Your Highness." He threw over his shoulder, that infuriating grin still playing on his lips, cursing under her breath. Elowen followed him, she told herself. It was merely to keep an eye on him, nothing more. The station's main promenade took her breath away, though. She fought hard not to show it. Transparent aluminum stretched overhead in graceful arc, offering an unobstructed view of the stars below. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species mingled freely, trading, laughing, living. "Notice anything interesting?" Terran asked, as they walked beside the shocking lack of proper social hierarchy. She replied dry. He laughed. "Look closer, see how many species are represented here." "Well, now, count how many of them are working with human technology." Elowen did look, and what she saw disturbed her. Everywhere humans were teaching others to use their devices, sharing their innovations freely. Even some Aryan, though none as highborn as are yourself, were eagerly learning from them. "Your point, my point, is that while your people were busy maintaining their precious bloodlines, we were out here mixing it up with everyone, learning, adapting, evolving. That's why we've advanced so quickly." "Diversity breathes strength," she scoffed. But her voice lacked its usual conviction. "And yet you remain physically inferior to many species. Are we in one fluid motion?" He caught her arm as she stumbled over an uneven section of flooring, a move so quick she hadn't even seen him reach for her. His touch sent an unexpected jolt through her body. She started suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. His scent, earthy and masculine, filled her nostrils, making it hard to think straight. "You were saying." His voice had dropped lower, and there was something in his eyes that made her stomach flip. She pulled away abruptly, her heart racing. "I need a drink." The station's observation lounge was mercifully quiet, with only a few patrons scattered around the circular room. The entire outer wall was transparent, offering a panoramic view of space and the nearby nebula, which painted everything in soft purples and blues. Terran ordered them both something called whiskey, and Alan had to admit it was surprisingly good, warm and complex, much like its provider. "Why did you really join this mission?" she asked after her second glass, her curiosity finally getting the better of her. He studied her for a moment before answering. "Because I'm good at what I do, and because I'm tired of species like yours looking down on humans." "Just because we're young, we don't look down," she began. "Automatically, please," he cut her off. "But gently. You've done nothing but remind me of my inferior status since we met." And yet he leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I've seen the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching." Heat rushed to her face. "And not just from the whiskey." "I don't." "You do." His voice was soft, but certain. "You're fascinated by us." "By me because deep down you know all that stuff about pure bloodlines is just that stuff. Biology doesn't care about nobility alone. It cares about survival, adaptation, attraction." "The way he said." Her name sent shivers down her spine. She should have been offended by his presumption, should have stormed out in a rage. Instead, she found herself leaning closer. "You're very sure of yourself," she whispered. "I'm sure about what I want." His hand found hers on the table. "Question is, are you brave enough to admit what you want?" The air between them crackled with tension. Elowen knew she should pull away, should remember her training, her position, her bloodline. But in that moment, with the stars wheeling overhead and his warm hand on hers, none of that seemed to matter. Later that night in his quarters, she discovered that humans were far from inferior in any way that counted. His touch was electric, his kisses intoxicating, and when they finally came together, it was with an intensity that shattered every preconception she'd ever had about his species. In the artificial dawn of the station's day cycle, Elowen lay awake watching Terran sleep. She traced the scars on his chest, each one telling a story of survival, of resilience. For the first time in her life, she questioned everything she'd been taught about bloodlines and breeding. But as the reality of what she'd done began to sink in, panic set in. She couldn't stay. This had been a mistake, a wonderful, earth-shattering mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. Without waking him, she slipped from his bed and fled back to her quarters. She spent the rest of their layover avoiding him, throwing herself into mission preparations, but she couldn't avoid the way her body hummed at his proximity, or how her dreams were filled with memories of their night together. When they finally left the station, something had fundamentally changed between them. The air crackled with unspoken words and unfulfilled desires. Their mission to recover the artifact suddenly seemed secondary to the storm brewing between them. The descent to Nexus Prime was anything but routine. Their ship rocked violently as it pierced the atmosphere, dodging sporadic bursts of enemy fire. Through the viewport alone could see the ancient city under siege, its legendary silver spires now scared by plasma burns. Raiders, Terence growled from the pilot seat. Looks like someone else wants that artifact. Owen gripped her seat tighter, fighting a wave of nausea that she knew had nothing to do with the turbulent landing. For the past week she'd been experiencing strange sensations, heightened awareness, unexpected dizziness, and an inexplicable craving for Earth foods she'd never even tasted. We need to land near the eastern quarter, she managed, pushing aside her discomfort. The artifact chamber lies beneath the Temple of Ancestral Memory. Terence's hands danced across the controls, guiding their ship into a narrow alley between two ancient buildings. Good thing I'm not just a pretty face with no pedigree, he quipped, but his tone was gentler than usual. The moment they touched down, Elo's combat training kicked in. She moved to check her weapons, but a sudden wave of dizziness made her stumble. Terran caught her arm, steadying her. You okay? His concern was evident, and the warmth of his touch sent familiar tingles through her body. I'm fine, she snapped, pulling away, but even as she did so, her body yearned to lean into his embrace. We need to move. They made their way through the ruined city, taking cover behind fallen columns and crumbling walls. The raiders had clearly been thorough in their assault, but their presence was oddly light in the sector. They haven't found it yet, Elowen whispered as they crouched behind a fallen statue. The artifact chamber is protected by ancient Asterian bloodlines, only those of pure lineage. Can she? Stopped. Another wave of nausea hitting her. Terence studied her again, his hand lingering on her lower back. You're not fine, he said firmly. What's going on? Before she could answer, a burst of plasma fire forced them to dive for cover. They rolled together behind a low wall, bodies pressed close in the confined space. The proximity made Ellen's head spin, but not from nausea this time. We need to move, she breathed, trying to ignore how right it felt to be this close to him again. Not until you tell me. What's wrong? He insisted, his voice low and intense. I've seen the signs of loan. The dizziness, the changes in your scent. She froze. My scent. Humans might not have your fancy bloodlines, but we've got pretty good instincts. His eyes searched hers. You're carrying my child, aren't you? The world seemed to stop. She'd been denying the possibility for days, but hearing him say it made it real. That's impossible. The genetic differences are clearly not as insurmountable as your people thought. His hand found her face, thumb gently stroking her cheek. Why didn't you tell me? Another explosion rocked the ground nearby, reminding them of their precarious situation. This isn't the time, she said, but her voice trembled. It's exactly the time. He pulled her closer, his eyes intense. Because if what I suspect is true, everything your people believe about pure bloodlines is wrong. And that artifact we here to recover, I bet it proves it. Ellen's mind raced. That the artifact was said to contain ancient genetic records from before the Great Diaspora, when humans and Asterian might have been more closely related than anyone suspected. The chamber, she gasped. We need to get there now. They moved through the ruins with renewed purpose, covering each other with an efficiency that spoke of their growing connection. When they finally reached the Temple of Ancestral Memory, Ellen's hand trembled as she placed it on the bloodlock. The door slid open, recognizing her lineage. But something felt different. The ancient mechanism must seem to pulse with unusual energy, responding not just to her Aryan blood, but to something else, something new growing within her. Inside, they found the artifact chamber untouched, its contents protected by fields of shimmering energy. But as Elowen approached the central pedestal, her body began to glow with the same energy. Terence, she whispered, I think it's responding to both bloodlines. The human and the Esteran combined. He moved to stand beside her, and when his hand touched hers, the energy field surrounding the artifact pulsed brighter. Maybe that's what it was waiting for all along, he suggested, proof that our species aren't meant to stay separate. The artifact itself was a simple crystal matrix, but as their combined touch activated it, it projected images that shook Elo's worldview to its core. Ancient genetic maps showed that humans and Ayan had indeed shared common ancestors, and that the rigid breeding programs of her people had actually weakened their bloodlines over millennia. All this time she breathed, "We thought we were preserving our strength when you were actually preventing it from growing." Terran finished. He pulled her close, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. "Our child isn't going to be weaker for having mixed blood, it's going to be stronger." The sound of approaching raiders echoed through the temple corridors. "We need to get out of here," Alan said, quickly securing the artifact. "And then we need to show this to the High Council." "Ready to shake up your whole society?" Terence asked, that familiar grin playing on his lips. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty ahead, Elowen found herself smiling back. "With you always." The ancient temple trembled as another explosion rocked its foundations. Terence pulled Elowen behind a massive pillar just as plasma fire scorched the spot where they had been standing. The artifact, safely secured in her pack, pulsed with a faint blue glow that seemed to resonate with her changing body. "We need to reach the ship," Karen said, his body pressed protectively against hers. "But they've got the main exit covered." Elo's amber eyes scanned the chamber, her tactical training kicking in despite the waves of dizziness. "There's an old maintenance tunnel. It'll take us through the catacombs underground. With raiders above, your condition." "My condition doesn't make me helpless," she snapped, though her hand unconsciously moved to her stomach. "Besides, I know these tunnels. They're part of our sacred architecture." Terence's expression softened. "Lead the way then, but stay close." They slipped into the narrow passage. The artifact's glow, providing just enough light to navigate the air, was thick with ancient dust, and Alan found herself grateful for Terence's steady presence behind her. His hand rested lightly on her lower back, ready to steady her if needed. "You know," he whispered as they moved through the darkness, "for someone who supposedly despises humans, you seem pretty comfortable with my touch." Despite their dire situation, heat rushed to her face. "This isn't the time for it's exactly the time," he interrupted, pulling her to a stop, "because we're about to face your entire society with news that will shake their worldview. I need to know where you stand above them." The sound of boots and weapons fire echoed through the stone, but in that moment, trapped in the ancient tunnels with the father of her unborn child, Elowen felt time slow. "I stand with the truth," she said finally, "whatever that means for my status, my family, everything." "I thought I knew." His hand found her face in the darkness, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "And us?" Before she could answer, a distant explosion sent tremors through the tunnel. They pressed forward, emerging into a different section of the city. Their ship was visible in the distance, but between them and safety stood a squad of raiders. "I count 6, Terence muttered. "We'll need a distraction." Elowen smiled, pulling out her ceremonial blade watch, and learned human. What followed was a dance of deadly precision. They moved in perfect sync, as if they'd fought together for years instead of days. Terence's raw strength and tactical brilliance complemented her aristocratic combat training in ways that left their opponents reeling. When they finally reached the ship, both were breathing hard but unharmed. As Terence prepared for takeoff, Elowen felt another wave of dizziness, stronger this time. "Hold on," he said, noticing her discomfort. "We're not out of this yet." The journey back to the Aryan capital was tense with anticipation, not just of the pursuit they'd surely face, but of what awaited them as their ship entered the familiar silver SP-fired skyline of the capital. Elan's heart raced. "My family will be waiting," she said softly. "The High Council too, once they learn what we found." Terence's hand found hers across the console. "Let them come. We've got something they can't ignore." The landing pad was indeed crowded with Aryan nobility, their ornate robes billowing in the engine wash at their heads. Stood Alan's father, High Lord Elowen Brightstar, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "Daughter," he called as they descended the ramp, "you will explain yourself immediately." On straightened her spine, feeling Terence's solid presence behind her father. "We've discovered something that changes everything we thought we knew about our bloodlines." "What we know," another council member interrupted, "is that you've been consorting with a human. The shame you bring to your house." "Shame?" Terence stepped forward, his voice carrying across the platform. "Your daughter carries the future in her womb, a child that will be stronger than any pure-blooded heir "You've produced in centuries." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elan's father's face went pale. "Impossible. The artifact proves otherwise," Elowen said. "Producing the ancient device, our ancestors knew the truth. Strength comes not from purity, but from diversity, from adaptation, from." She glanced at Terence. "Resilience." The artifact activated, projecting its revelations for all to see as the ancient genetic maps filled the air with shimmering light. Elowen felt Terence's hand slip into hers, ready to change the world. He whispered. She squeezed his hand, feeling their child's energy pulse in harmony with the artifact. "With you always." The grand medical chamber of the Asterian palace sparkled with advanced diagnostic equipment, its pristine white walls reflecting the soft blue glow of monitoring screens. Elowen lay on the examination platform, her growing belly exposed to the scrutiny of the realm's finest geneticist. Terence stood beside her, his presence both protective and defiant. "Extraordinary," muttered Chief Geneticist Aldrin, his eyes wide as he studied the holographic display. "The fetal development is progressing at an unprecedented rate. The genetic markers show perfect fusion between human and Aryan DNA, creating entirely new beneficial traits." High Lord Thallon paced nearby, his traditional robes rustling. "But is it safe?" "Natural." "Natural." Terence's voice carried an edge. "More natural than your centuries of selective breeding. Your daughter's body accepts our child because it's meant to be." Elowen felt a flutter in her stomach, as if the baby was agreeing. She reached for Terence's hand, no longer caring about the disapproving looks from the assembled nobles. "The artifact showed us the truth. Our ancestors knew the power of genetic diversity, and now we have living proof." Eldon announced, gesturing to his readings. "The hybrid fetus shows enhanced cellular regeneration, improved neuroplasticity, and strengthened immune responses. It's not just combining our traits, it's improving them." A murmur rippled in. "Our," noticed several younger nobles, nodding thoughtfully while the older generation looked scandalized. Her father's expression remained unreadable. "The High Council demands more concrete evidence," announced Lord Vaughan, traditionalist known for his hardline stance on bloodline purity. "We require comparative testing between pure Asterian nobles," and he glanced disdainfully at Terran human specimens. Terence stepped forward, rolling up his sleeve. "Happy to oblige. Let's see how your pure blood holds up against some good old human resilience." What followed was a series of physical and mental challenges that left even the staunchest critics speechless. While the Asterian nobles showed their expected superiority in traditional areas, refined energy manipulation, ceremonial combat forms, Terran demonstrated remarkable adaptability, raw strength, and tactical thinking that repeatedly caught them off guard. "Your techniques are impressive," admitted Lord Venon, helping parents up after a particularly intense sparring match. "Perhaps there is something to be said for your unorthodox methods, but not everyone was convinced." As Elowen and rested between tests, she overheard whispered conversations about preserving racial purity and containing the contamination. Her protective instincts flared. Hand moving to her belly. That night in their secured quarters, Terence held her close. "They're afraid," he murmured into her hair. "Not of me, but of what we represent. Change. My people fear change because we've been stagnant for so long," she replied, turning to face him. "We thought we were preserving our strength, but we were actually limiting it." His hand traced the curve of her stomach, sending shivers through her body. "Well, this little one is going to show them just how limiting they've been." Their lips met in a kiss that spoke of shared defiance, shared hope, and something deeper that neither had dared name yet. As pass overtook them, Elowen marveled at how natural it felt now, how right. Every touch, every breath confirmed what the artifact had revealed. They were meant to be together. The next morning brought both triumph and trouble. The medical results were undeniable. The hybrid pregnancy was producing genetic improvements that centuries of selective breeding had failed to achieve, but success bred fear among the traditionalists. "This is an abomination," Lord Vaughan declared during the council session. "We cannot allow our pure bloodlines to be corrupted by human genetic material." Corrupted. Terence's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "Your pure bloodlines are weakening with each generation. Meanwhile, humanity has evolved more in a few thousand years than your people have in 20 millennia." "He speaks truth," came a surprising voice. Ellen's father stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. I have reviewed the ancient records contained in the artifact. Our ancestors understood something we've forgotten. Strength comes from adaptation, not isolation. The chamber erupted in chaos. But Alan barely heard it. Her attention was caught by movement in the shadows. Guards loyal to Lord Vaughn, moving with suspicious purpose. Terence, she whispered, battle instincts kicking in. We're about to have company. He nodded slightly, already shifting into a defensive stance. How many? 6. No, 8, armed with stun weapons. They won't risk harming the baby. But they might try to separate us. Let them try. His grin was fierce and proud. Show them what happens when human determination meets Aryan grace. The ensuing conflict was brief but spectacular. Working in perfect sync, they neutralized their would-be captors with a combination of his raw power and her refined technique. When it was over, Lord Vaughn stood in shocked silence, while the young nobles applauded. You see, Elowen addressed the council, standing proud despite her pregnancy. This is what we can become, not weaker but stronger, not divided, but united. Our child will be proof that the future belongs to those brave enough to embrace change. The final weeks of Alan's pregnancy transformed the Asterian palace into a fortress of conflicting ideologies. Security teams loyal to her father patrolled the quarters, while tread-naced nobles whispered in shadowy corners. At the center of it all, in their private chambers, Elowen and Terence prepared for a moment that would change both their worlds forever. The baby's energy signature is off the charts, Chief Geneticist Aldrin reported during their final examination. We've never seen anything like it. Terence stood at the window, watching the twin moons rise over the capital's silver spires. Of course you haven't. You've spent centuries trying to preserve what you have instead of discovering what you could become. Alone smiled from her bed, her hand resting on her swollen belly. The child within radiated strength unlike anything in recorded Asterian history. Even the most hardened traditionalists couldn't deny the readings. Your father sends word, Terence said, turning from the window. The protective detail has been doubled. Lord Vaughn's supporters are getting desperate. Let them come, Elowen replied, her amber eyes flashing. They'll find that pregnancy hasn't my combat reflexes. He crossed the room to her side, his touch sending familiar electricity through her skin. Always ready for a fight. That's what I love about you. The word hung between them, unspoken until now. Elowen pulled him closer, their foreheads touching. Love, not bad for a human with no pedigree. You're never going to let me forget that, are you? Never. She kissed him deeply, their passion undiminished by the circumstances, especially since you proved me so wonderfully wrong. Their moment was interrupted by a sharp kick from within her womb. Terence laughed, placing his hand beside hers. Strong just like their mother and resilient like their father. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and tension. The medical chamber was secured. Ancient birthing protocols were reviewed, and both human and Aryan medical experts were brought in to monitor the unprecedented event. Then, during a stormy night that seemed to reflect the tumultuous atmosphere within the palace, Elowen went into labor. Multiple energy signatures detected, announced one of the medical monitors. The child's power is extraordinary. Terence held her hand as contractions racked her body. Children, he corrected. Twins, a boy and a girl. The assembled nobles gasped. Twins were rare among Asterian, considered a powerful omen that the first human Asterian hybrid birth would produce twins seemed like destiny itself was making a statement. My lord, the guard burst into the chamber. Lord Vaughn's followers are attempting to breach the medical wing. High Lord Thalion drew himself up to his full height. Let them come. They will not disrupt this sacred moment. But disruption came in an unexpected form as Elo's labor intensified. The ancient artifact recovered, began to pulse in sync with her contractions. Energy patterns swirled through the chamber, forming images of past unions between humans and Asterian, each producing children of remarkable ability. And it's not just genetic compatibility. Chief Geneticist Aldrin breathed, studying the readings. It's genetic destiny. Our species were meant to unite to become something greater than either alone. The twins entered the world in a burst of light that temporarily blinded the monitoring equipment. When the glow faded, even the most skeptical observers fell silent in awe. The boy had Terence's strong features, but Elowen's amber eyes, while the girl possessed her mother's fiery hair and her father's Determined jaw both radiated an energy signature that defied conventional measurement. Impossible, whispered Lord Vaughn, who had fought his way into the chamber only to freeze at the sight. They're perfect, not impossible, Terence said, cradling his son, while Elowen held their daughter. Inevitable. This is what happens when you stop fighting nature and embrace change. The children's first cries echoed through the palace with unusual strength, and something extraordinary happened. The ancients' systems that powered the building's security, its very architecture, responded to their voices. Lights flickered, doors sealed and unsealed, and the entire structure seemed to recognize them as its rightful heirs. The bloodline protocols. High Lord Thalion breathed their accepting both lineages as valid as royal. Elowen looked up at Terran, tears of joy streaming down her face. Still think you have no pedigree, he laughed, leaning down to kiss her. I think we just created our own. The twins grew stronger by the hour, displaying abilities that combined the best of both species. The boy showed early signs of human adaptability merge with Asterian energy manipulation, while the girl demonstrated unprecedented physical capabilities enhanced by natural grace. As word spread through the capital, crowds gathered outside the palace. But instead of the riots the traditionalists had feared, there was celebration. Other hidden couples, human and Asterian, began to step forward. The dam had broken and centuries of artificial separation began to crumble. You know what this means? Terence asked. Later, as they watched their children sleep in their cradle, everything changes. Now everything already has, Elowen replied, leaning into his embrace. And I wouldn't have it any other way. The Asterian palace's private training arena echoed with the sound of childish laughter, mixed with gasps of astonishment. At just 3 months old, the twins already displayed physical development equivalent to year-old children, and their abilities twice all previous understanding of both human and Asterian capabilities. Elowen watched as her daughter Aurora levitated several training orbs while simultaneously manipulating their energy patterns, a feat that typically required decades of Aryan training. Beside her, Alexander, their son, demonstrated an uncanny ability to adapt to and counter every challenge presented. His human resourcefulness enhanced by Aryan precision. Remarkable, chief geneticist Aldrin muttered, his instruments struggling to keep up with the readings. Their development rate exceeds our most optimistic projections. Terran stepped forward to catch Aurora as she gracefully descended from her levitation. Exercise, that's my girl, he beamed, his pride evident, showing those stuffy nobles how it's done. I heard that. ELO and teased, but her eyes sparkled with amusement. The past months had transformed their relationship into something deeper than she'd ever imagined possible. Every shared moment with their children only strengthened their bond. The High Council chamber had been converted into a special observation gallery where representatives from both human and Assyrian governments gathered daily to witness the twins' progress. Today's session was particularly important. The council would vote on officially recognizing human-Aryan unions. The evidence is undeniable. High Lord Thalion addressed the assembly, gesturing toward his grandchildren. These children represent not the dilution of our bloodlines, but their evolution. Their abilities combine human adaptive ability with Aryan energy manipulation in ways we never thought possible. Alexander chose that moment to demonstrate a new ability, instinctively healing a small cut on his sister's hand with a combination of human cellular regeneration and Aryan energy manipulation. The assembled nobles murmured in amazement. But how can we be certain these abilities are stable? Lord Vaughn, now more curious than hostile, asked. What of future generations? That's exactly what we need to find out, Terence replied, stepping onto the council floor. But we can't do that if we keep pretending our species aren't meant to interact. Elowen moved to join him, their children following with unusual grace for their age. Look at them, she challenged the assembly. I once mocked this man for having no pedigree, but our children proved that true strength comes from embracing our differences, not hiding from them. The twins suddenly linked hands, and the entire chamber hummed with energy. Displays flickered to life, showing genetic projections that even the scientists hadn't accessed yet. Aurora's voice, unusually clear for her age, rang out. We are the bridge. Alexander continued to become more. The council chamber erupted in shocked Whispers. Not only were the twins speaking in full sentences months before they should be able to, but they were accessing and interpreting genetic data instinctively later that night in their private chambers. Elowen and watched their miracle children sleep. Remember when you thought humans were beneath you? He teased, pulling her close. Age. And now look at me, she purred, turning in his embrace. The mother of the most extraordinary children in the galaxy, married to a man who proved that pedigree means nothing compared to heart. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, the physical attraction between them as strong as ever, enhanced by their shared wonder at what they'd created together. The twins' energy signature pulsed softly in their sleep, harmonizing with their parents' own energies in a way that suggested their bond was more than just physical. It was evolutionary destiny. The council will have to approve the recognition act now, Elowen murmured against his chest. Our children have proved everything we claimed and more. And what about you? Terence asked, his fingers tracing the elegant point of her ear. Still think pure bloodlines are the way to go, she laughed, soft, mindful of their sleeping children. I think you've thoroughly corrupted me with your human way of thinking, and I couldn't be happier about it. A soft glow from the artifact interrupted their moment. The ancient device, kept secure in their chambers, had begun responding to the twins' presence in new ways, revealing deeper layers of information about human Aryan genetic compatibility. Look at this alone. Breath studying the new data, the artifact suggests our children aren't just hybrid successes. They're the template for a new evolutionary path, one that both our species were meant to follow all along. Terence wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they watched the genetic maps unfold. So when you called me a nameless nobody, I was spectacularly wrong, she finished, turning to face him. You're the father of a new age. Our children are living proof that humanity's greatest strength isn't in its pedigree, but in its potential. The grand reception hall of the Asterian Palace buzzed with an unprecedented mixture of human and Aryan couples. What began as a routine diplomatic gathering had transformed into something far more significant when Aurora and Alexander, now resembling 6-year-olds despite being only 4 months old, insisted on attending. They're doing it again, Terence whispered to Elowen, watching their children move purposefully through the crowd. The twins' presence seemed to create a subtle resonance in the air, particularly strong around mixed couples. Elowen nodded, her amber eyes tracking their movements. They're drawn to potential. Look at how the artifact responds. The ancient device, now permanently installed in the hall's central pedestal, pulsed with a soft light that matched their children's aura. A young Aryan noble lady stood with her human partner, an alliance marine, both looking uncertain about their public appearance, or approached them, her fiery hair so like her mother's, catching the light. Your bloodlines sing together, she announced, taking their hands. Alexander joined her, completing a circuit of energy that made the couple gasp. The marine's eyes widen. I can feel something like static electricity, but inside his Asterian partner's face showed wonder. The dormant energy channels, their awakening throughout the hall. Similar scenes played out. The twins moved from couple to couple, their touch somehow activating latent genetic potential that neither species knew they possessed. Some humans began displaying rudimentary energy manipulation, while their Asterian partners showed increased adaptability and physical resilience. Chief geneticist Aldrin rushed between couples, his instruments whirring. It's extraordinary. They're not just combining traits, they're awakening abilities that have been dormant in both species. The genetic markers are almost identical to those in the twins, just waiting to be activated. Terence pulled a low and close, his touch sending familiar shivers down her spine. Remember when you thought mixing bloodlines would weaken your people? She turned in his embrace, her lips brushing his ear. I remember a lot of things I was wrong about. Care to remind me again how wrong I was later? Their flirtatious moment was interrupted by Lord Ven's son, now an advocate for genetic integration, approaching with his human wife. The council is amazed. We've documented 47 cases of enhanced abilities in just the past hour. 48, Aurora corrected, appearing beside them. Mother and father's bond is still evolving too. Elowen felt it then, a deepening of the connection she shared with Terence beyond the physical attraction that had first drawn them Together their energies intertwined in new ways, strengthening both of them. Alexander joined his sister, their combined presence, amplifying the effect the old barriers were artificial were, helping nature correct a mistake. The twins' vocabulary and insight continued to astound everyone but their parents. Had learned to trust their understanding. The children seemed to knowledge stored in the very fabric of their hybrid DNA. Later that night in their private garden, Elowen and Terence watched their children demonstrate their latest discovery. Aurora created complex energy patterns, while Alexander instinctively found ways to enhance and stabilize them. Abilities that mirrored their parents, strengthening bond. They're not just our children anymore, Elowen mused, leaning back against Terence's chest. They're catalysts for change across both our species. His arms tightened around her waist, having second thoughts about choosing a mate with no pedigree. She turned to face him, her eyes glowing with mischief and desire. The only thing I regret is how long I wasted fighting this attraction. Imagine if we started this genetic renaissance sooner. Their kiss was interrupted by giggles from the twins' father's genetic contribution was essential. Aurora declared matter-of-factly, human adaptability creates the perfect foundation for enhanced abilities, and mother's Aryan energy affinity provides the structure. Alexander added, together they makes something new, something better. The artifacts glow, intensify, projecting new data about the spreading genetic awakening. More couples were coming forward daily, drawn by rumors of the twins' abilities. Each new pairing seemed to strengthen the overall effect, creating a cascade of evolutionary progress. Your children have become quite the matchmakers, High Lord Thalion observed, joining them in the garden. Though I suspect they're doing more than just encouraging romance, they're fulfilling our species' shared destiny. Elowen replied, watching her children continue their energy experiments. Everything we thought we knew about genetic purity was wrong. True strength comes from unity, not isolation. Terence grinned, that same confident expression that had first gotten under her skin. Oh, turns out humans had something valuable to offer after all. Indeed, she purred, pulling him closer, though I think we should conduct some private research later, just to be thorough. The twins' power had awakened something in them to a deeper connection that made their intimate moments more intense, more meaningful. Their bond was proof that the genetic renaissance wasn't just about physical traits, but about emotional and spiritual connections as well. The great hall of prophecies, hidden beneath the Asterian palace for millennia, blazed with unprecedented light as Aurora and Alexander led a procession of hybrid children through its ancient corridors. In the 6 months since their birth, 12 more human Asterian pairs had produced offspring with similar extraordinary abilities. Each new child seemed to unlock another layer of the artifact's ancient wisdom. The prophecy speaks of the star child generation, Aurora announced, her voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. Despite her youthful appearance, now resembling a 10-year-old, she stood before the assembled dignitaries from both species. Alexander, matching his sister's physical development, placed his hand on the central pillar. We are not an accident, we are the fulfillment of a plan set in motion. When our species first died, Elowen watched her children with pride, her hand intertwined with terror as the connection between them had grown stronger with each passing day, their bond now transcending physical attraction to become something that even the oldest Chian texts struggled to define. The artifact's final encryption is breaking. Chief geneticist Alren reported his instruments tracking waves of energy flowing between the hybrid children. It's responding to their combined presence. The chamber's walls came alive with holographic displays showing the intertwined destiny of Hum and Assyrian. The images revealed that the separation of the species had been a temporary measure designed to allow each race to develop unique strengths that would later combine to create something greater. Your children were the key, High Lord Thalion addressed Elowen and Terence. When my daughter first told me she conceived with a human, I thought our bloodline was tainted. Now I understand. We were never meant to remain pure. Terence pulled Elowen closer, his touch sending familiar sparks through her body. Funny how things work out, from no pedigree to helping create a new species. Don't get smug, she teased, though her amber eyes glowed with affection. Though I must admit your resilience has proven quite valuable. In many ways, their flirtation was interrupted by a collective gasp from the assembly. The newest hybrid child, barely a month old, had spontaneously manifested energy wings, a feat previously thought impossible for either species. The genetic potential is accelerating, Aurora explained. Each new generation builds upon the last, combining human adaptability with Aryan energy, mastery in ways previously unimagined. Alexander stepped forward. The prophecy speaks of 3 waves. We are the first wave, the awakeners. The second wave begins now as more children are born with activated potential. The third wave will come when both species fully embrace their shared destiny. The artifact pulsed with renewed energy, projecting images of a future where the barrier between human and Asterian abilities had completely dissolved. The new hybrid species possessed strengths that neither parent race could have achieved alone. Later that night, in their private chambers, Elowen and Terence celebrated their role in this evolutionary renaissance in their own intimate way. Their passionate connection, once considered taboo, had become the template for a new understanding of genetic compatibility. Did you ever imagine, Elowen murmured against Terence's chest, that your inferior human genetics would help create a new evolutionary branch? He laughed, pulling her closer. I knew there was something special about us from the start, though I admit becoming the father of a new species wasn't exactly in my mission. Briefing their moment was interrupted by a soft knock. Aurora and Alexander entered, their faces glowing with excitement. Mother, father, the other children have made a discovery. The prophecy isn't just about genetic potential, it's about unlocking the next stage of consciousness for both species. The twins led their parents back to the great hall where the other hybrid children had assembled together. They demonstrated abilities that transcended physical evolution: telepathic bonds, shared consciousness, and a deep connection to the universe itself. This is what our species were meant to become, Aurora declared. Not just physically superior, but spiritually and mentally evolved. The old questions about pedigree and bloodlines seem rather small now, don't they? Terence whispered to Elowen. She turned to face him, her expression softening. I was so wrong about everything, about humans, about genetic purity, about you. Well, he grinned. I did tell you I was resilient. The artifact's final prophecy unfurled before them, showing a future where the distinction between human and Aryan had dissolved, entirely replaced by a new species that embodied the best of both worlds. The Star Child generation would guide both parent races toward this destiny, helping them overcome millennia of artificial separation. High Lord Thelian stepped forward, addressing the assembly. From this day forward, there will be no more talk of pure bloodlines or genetic superiority. We are all one people walking together toward a shared future. Ela went and looked at her children, now leading the next generation of hybrid offspring in exploring their combined potential. Then she turned to Terence, the human she had once mocked for having no pedigree, now recognized as the co-creator of a new evolutionary path. I love you, she said, simply, no longer caring about propriety or tradition. His response was to pull her into a kiss that sent ripples of energy through the chamber, their bond resonating with the artifact's ancient power around them. The hybrid children shared their combined energy, creating a display of light and power that symbolized the dawn of a new era. The prophecy was fulfilled, but their story was just beginning. The journey from prejudice to love, from separation to unity, had opened a path that would transform both species forever. And it all began because a proud Aryan noble dared to love a human with no pedigree, only to discover that true strength lies not in the purity of blood, but in the courage to embrace change.